Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. Sammy here, your host, and today we're talking burnout. It is, as this podcast is going live, Giving Tuesday, and I'm sure that you have had a crazy few days leading up to this. I'm sure that you're feeling crazy today. You're probably not even listening to this on Giving Tuesday, and that's totally fine. I forgive you. But it's just seemed like a great time and opportunity to talk about burnout and systems in our business and how can we be successful, feel supported, and really make sure that we are doing our best work and getting the best results for our organization. So today I'm joined by Katie Matusky to talk about just that. Katie helps digital entrepreneurs build systems and teams that can run without them. As a former Fortune 1 PM, Katie blends the structure and systems of business ops with the freedom and flexibility of online entrepreneurship so you can translate your expertise into a simple, profitable business. For over a decade, Katie has been guiding business owners to streamline their operations, position their offers, and build highly efficient teams. Based in Chicago, Illinois, Katie is married to a dashing engineer and dog mom to 2 adorable dachshunds. She enjoys hosting dinner parties, collecting wine, and traveling the world with her husband. She gives some great tips for ways that you can ask for help, get support, create solutions, so that you can continue to do the things that you do best. So I hope that you enjoy this episode, and make sure you share with us on Facebook or Instagram at The First Click Marketing what your favorite tip was. I'd love to hear it. But before we get into this episode, this is brought to you by our Patreon account. We love helping you take action when it comes to listening to these episodes. So become a patron and we will give you resources, workbooks. We do live Q&As, all sorts of things to help you continue to take action on these episodes to grow, scale, and make the biggest impact that you can with your organization. So head on over to thefirstclick.net/Patreon to learn more. Membership started as little as $5 a month. I hope to see you there. Let's get into the episode. You're listening to the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern, and each week I bring you tips from myself and other experts, as well as hot seats with small business owners and entrepreneurs to demystify digital marketing and get you on your way to generating more leads and growing your business. Hey everybody, join me in welcoming Katie Matusky to the podcast. I am so excited for the conversation we're going to have, but Katie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Sammy. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah. So before we get started, I've introduced people to you a little bit, but I just kind of want to hear from you. Like, why do you think preventing burnout and kind of keeping space for yourself is such an important topic, especially this time of year?
Well, yeah, I think in particular, this time of year is when most people start to think about it, right? Because the holidays are here. We're all trying to scale back a little bit in our businesses and enjoy more face time with our family. Often, if you have children, you're trying to create new traditions. And so I think that this time of year, it really comes up a lot. And I think the reason that the burnout becomes a little scarier for us this time of year is because we have so many extra things on our plate around the holidays that just normally don't exist. So often I find that business owners, when they're looking at Q4 and they're kind of planning what they're going to get done, they typically are not taking into account all of the extra stuff we do in November and December, right? Like as humans, like it happens every year, but because it only happens once a year, you've like forgotten about it when you sit down to plan Q4. And so I think that that's one of the reasons that people start to feel really tapped out is that even if you're trying to scale back from your business, your personal life is kicking into high gear. Like you have so much more going on your plate in November, December, especially if you're like the sort of the matriarch of your household and you're in charge of buying presents and entertaining and cooking. And, and then it gets to be a lot.
All the emotions that happen around families and gatherings and, you know, like it's the emotional stuff on top of just the
kind of more or less shut down the business the last 6 weeks of the year because we know that we're not going to get anything done. Mm-hmm. Like we're around, we're there for our clients, but we're not starting big projects or doing anything massive the last 6 weeks of the year. And so I think that, with entrepreneurs, learning to plan for that, learning to know, like, you know what, we're just not going to get anything shipped. Imagine how much less stressed you would be walking into December if you had decided 2 months ago that you weren't going to try to ship anything huge. Like,
yeah, I think that's so smart. I think it's remembering, like, let's just pay attention to critical mass, like what has to get done. And let's let everything else kind of wait and plan for that in kind of Q1 of the next year.
Yeah. And now in thinking about too, like in your business planning, like I think that often we think of it like when we go on vacation, right? When we go on vacation, we're like, okay, we'll take extra clients before, and then we're going to kind of slow down. But I wish that people would do that for times like this, for the holidays, where they're just automatically anticipating we're not going to get as much done. It's going to be a more distracting time for the whole team. So we might as well just take some time off, recharge, and just kind of like roll with it.
Yeah, no, I love that. So when we're talking about like our work environment and like making space, like you said, in your schedule, whether it's year end or holidays or vacation, like you just mentioned, but why do you think there's so much burnout in the fundraising space specifically? Because fundraisers, I mean, like their lifespan at a specific organization is typically not that long. So why do you think that is?
Sure. I think that, are you there?
I'm here. Sorry if you lost me.
Sorry. It's okay.
You're fine.
Yes. So I do think that the burnout with fundraising, it kind of reminds me of, it's funny because I think of like fundraising and grant writing kind of similarly to the public relations field. And I think that the burnout is coming from just the massive amount of work behind raising funds, right? It's kind of like you can do a ton of work. In the case of grant writing, you might write a 30-page report about why you need this grant. Or if you're asking people for funding for your company, if it's not grant writing, it's a lot of groundwork that you have to do. And there's no guarantee of a result, just like PR. You can hire a PR firm to pitch on behalf of your business to get you more visibility, but there's no guarantee they're going to be able to actually land you a media placement. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's that. I think it's the constant like pressure of trying to do right by the company that's hired you or your own business, if you're just fundraising for your own company, and having to do all of that work, knowing that at the end of it, you may or may not see the results you're hoping for. I think that's exhausting. And if they haven't like systematized their process, if they don't really have like a smart strategy for fundraising that is proven to work for them, they're going to get exhausted throwing spaghetti at the wall.
I mean, I love that as an analogy. That's so smart and that makes so much sense. And I also feel like if leadership isn't supporting their development team in allowing them to maybe go after those things, right? Like you want a PR firm to go after some of the big fish, knowing that they're probably going to fail at some of that. But if they do land one, like that's awesome. And I think the same is true with fundraising. If your leadership isn't allowing you to kind of have some of that flexibility, you're right, that pressure is really intense.
Right. Because, and also making decisions. Like, I think that's the other hard thing is like, you have to actually decide where you're going to spend your energy trying to get these funds. And you can't put all your eggs in the big fish basket because, everybody else is.
Right.
So it's learning to find that right mix, I think, is also something that can be difficult.
So do you have any tips for people when they're, trying to maybe manage their workload and figure out where they're going to put their efforts? You mentioned what's your proven fundraising strategy and do more of that. But do you kind of have any tips on managing, what percentage should I spend my time taking risks and how should I kind of organize things so that I'm still hitting my goals? And I know this is kind of very broad, but Like, how might we want to start thinking about how we go into the next year, really kind of organizing our workload and making sure that we're kind of hitting everything?
Sure. So I think that, fundraising it's kind of like sales.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it really is the same thing. It's just that instead of selling a product or service, you're just raising funds to be able to offer it. But I think that you need a good process for qualifying quote unquote leads for who you're trying to get funding from. So like you have to come up with some way to determine this is our typical conversion rate for each level of fundraising that you're trying to do, right? Big fish versus little fish. And then you also need to have some way to qualify whether someone's actually a prospect worth pursuing. Like, what does the competition look like? What's the likelihood that I'm going to be able to close a deal with this company or this individual versus a different one? We use ClickUp to track our sales leads. Mm-hmm. And so in there, we'll actually put in like the deal size that we think we would get for that project. And then the likelihood that we're going to close them. We use those two metrics as like the gauge for who to spend the most time pursuing. Because if it's a big ticket deal and it's also a high probability that we'll close them, I would rather a sales rep spend more time on that than like 5 small ticket deals that are a 10% chance of close. It just doesn't make sense. So you have to like come up with your system for how you're going to rate the leads on the table and who you're going to be pursuing. And then once you're there, you also need the process of what is the most direct path to cash. And so, as you know, with grant writing, it can be extremely labor intensive, is throwing a fundraiser or doing door to door, in the age of technology, maybe sliding in the DMs and you know what I mean? Like, what are the actual strategies that are your direct paths to cash? Because I think often people overcomplicate it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And it's like, we don't need to do that. We don't need 500 steps in the sales process. Like, you're really just trying to say, here's what I offer. Here's why it's valuable. Here's why you should support it. And then from there, have either a 10-minute conversation or, a quick coffee with somebody that is a decision maker that can really connect with you and take the next step. That's the other thing. Are you even talking to the right people?
Right. Yeah.
I think that's something people struggle with.
Well, and you're speaking my language because I often talk with our nonprofit clients about like, if you ran your nonprofit as if you were a for-profit, like the same sales strategies apply, the same marketing strategies apply. And if you can make it about them and really figure out if you're talking to the right people, I think that's work that nonprofits don't do. And the data that you're talking about as well. Because now it's not just throwing spaghetti at the wall, it's structured, and then you can have a better conversation with your superior. So I love that you use ClickUp. I use ClickUp too.
Yeah.
And most nonprofits have a CRM, and I think that their data can be tracked much easier, but it's putting that data into the system. So once you have that data at your fingertips and you're operating on that, it just makes the communication so much easier. So, what's kind of your communication style, like with your team, or, like, how are you guys working through that on a regular basis? So it's not just like, oh, shoot, we're down. We need to make $5,000 this month in order to be able to continue to provide services, to be a little bit more proactive. Like, how do you guys communicate that as a team?
Yeah. So, a couple things. So the first thing is what you're talking about is like critical success factors. So when we're looking at data in businesses, whether it's profit or nonprofit, you've got cause and effect, right? And so most people can track effect. They track KPIs, revenue. It's all the stuff that has already happened.
Yeah.
But what you're looking for are those guideposts, those, blinking red lights that say, yes, you are on the right track to meeting the business's objective. And so it's important to identify what those are. One way to identify that is your conversion rate at the different levels, right? So knowing that is going to help you make decisions about how many like leads, quote unquote, you need to have in your pipeline at a time to meet your objective. But there's other ones you can look for too, like you may find that if you are, speaking at an event or having some large fundraising event once a month, that your conversion rate goes up 30%. If that's the case, I would say making sure having one of those events on the calendar and having it well run is a critical success factor for your business. And so they can look different for different types of businesses, but it's important to identify what those are. And then as far as communication, in my business, I meet with my integrator once a week. We sit down, we look at pretty much everything that is happening in the business that week. So everything from content marketing to what projects do we have open. We will look at the sales pipeline and talk about leads and how we want to follow up with them, but also, who do we need to follow up with? Who are we pitching? What's our game plan for the week? And then when we're actually in our quote unquote CRM that I've built inside ClickUp, which will get more functional because ClickUp is really moving towards enterprise. So we're going to get more functionality that makes it a full-blown CRM, but right now it's kind of like a makeshift one. So when I'm in there, whenever we make any outreach at all, we're using comments to track it. And you can actually go in my sales pipeline and see for each individual lead, not only the deal amount and the probability that we're going to close them, but you can see the last comment, you can see all the comments like in each row so that I can at a glance see when was the last time we touched this lead, what was the last thing we said to them. They'll make comments like, yes, but they need to wait a month, or no, this isn't a good time, but maybe next year. And so we're kind of managing everything within that task. And so we just make comments for each other. We'll assign each other comments. I really try to keep work out of the inbox. I'm a little bit psycho about it. ClickUp allows you to send emails now from ClickUp. So, and it'll tell us if they've been seen. If someone replies to the email, then it'll show back up in ClickUp as a comment. So I really try to keep it all within the task for that lead, so that whoever is touching it gets the whole picture in one place.
Well, and I think this is really important. And whether you're using ClickUp or whatever tool, any CRM tool you're using is going to allow this. But that, like let's say you get sick one day and you can't come into the office, like it just allows your team to seamlessly continue on, and that your business doesn't suffer for that. So I think that's key. And then the other piece that I love that you touched on was, your data is only as good as what you put in it. So I think keeping your team super diligent on those processes and systems, like you talked about, helps just everybody work more efficiently, which is going to help with the burnout factor, right? Because everybody is working on the same page and knows where to find the information.
Absolutely. And honestly, your processes are everything. Like, I know that I sound biased as someone who's an operations person, but like, if you have business objectives and you don't actually know how the processes in your business support those objectives or get you to where you're trying to go, you have some work to do.
Yeah.
And I think that taking the time to identify what is our process, how often are we maintaining these contacts in our CRM? How often are we reaching out? What is our protocol for, the 10 different scenarios we typically come across? Having that stuff sort of pre-mapped out and having, your CRM set up in a way that it can kind of automate a lot of it for you so that you're not counting on humans to remember all the right things.
Right.
That you're taking the human error out of it and just allowing the business to keep running no matter who has to pick up the football that day.
Yeah. And I also love that you mentioned kind of the proactiveness, like you meet with your integrator once a week and you go through what's coming up. How critical is that, do you think, in your guys' ability to continue to move the business in the direction that the goals that you've set, but then also when things aren't quite going the way that maybe you want them to be? So let's say maybe you lose a big donor or you don't get that grant. How critical is that then to allowing you to pivot and adjust to kind of the current setting that your business is in a positive way where the team is still all moving forward together?
Yeah, it's like DEFCON 5 critical to have that meeting. I think that, the strategy piece does get lost a lot, especially further down the chain, right? So if you're not the owner or the COO, you may not be in all the meetings. You may not be abreast of everything that everyone's talking about. And so I think that having that meeting and kind of having that report available to everyone so they can see what's going on in the business that week is huge. And as far as the ability to pivot, I mean, we will still, touch base here or there on a contact if it's something urgent or timely. We won't wait until the next week to do it. But I think that, if you've lost a big sale and you really we probably wouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. But if we did, and we had to pivot, those weekly meetings would be, where we sit down and we say, okay, well, what is the next plan? Or what is the next thing that we can do? Who else can we reach out to? Do we have anybody lukewarm, to try to stop the bleeding at that point? Because it's just, it's not a good place to be. I definitely don't recommend.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, having those systems and the data and really understanding where your income is coming from, where your donations are coming from, and which avenues are the most profitable, I think helps support that. And I mean, I'm with you. I'm a firm believer in let's have as many streams of income as we can coming into our business that makes sense so that we don't have those situations.
Right. I mean, if you're a company that has like 3 big fundraising donors, you're probably in trouble because if you drop one, that's a huge chunk of money. Like if I would run it the way that I tell my, the entrepreneurs that I coach to run it, which is that no client, or in this case, no fundraising source should take up more than 15% of the income that you have coming in. Because that you could probably you could deal with losing 15%, but if it's more than that, it's going to be a pretty hefty hit. To your operation.
100%. So I feel like a lot of burnout in the workplace is also with not feeling supported either, by your superiors, or just not feeling like you have that space to kind of, like we talked about earlier, have that creativity to maybe try new things, or when things don't work out, you feel like you're going to get hammered. And there's nothing worse than getting that phone call from your boss saying, hey, I need to see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's it. So what kind of maybe communication ideas do you have for both like your superior and maybe like for the fundraiser, to enter into those conversations in a more, I was going to say cohesive, but collaborative way so that it's more about problem solving and knowing that we're all here to help the organization thrive and kind of remind ourselves to pull the emotions out of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that first of all, it can be difficult if you're working for somebody that makes decisions based on what they want instead of what the business actually needs. Yeah. Right. So that's a difficult thing. But I think that it actually comes back to the data. So when you're sitting down with that business owner, you should be able to whip out your CRM and say, here's the leads that we're working with. Here are the projects that we're pursuing. Here is why, right? So going back to what's the likelihood that we're going to get it? How much is it going to bring us? I would start talking to the data when you're sitting down with them. And if they have questions or they want to change the direction, that's up to them. But for you want to place yourself in a position where it's like, what I'm doing is based on the data. So I'm not just guessing. I'm not throwing spaghetti at the wall. Here's what the data is telling us. And here's what we're going to do because of the data and what it's telling us. And I think that if you start to shift that conversation to data, it's going to be really, really hard for them to stamp their feet and say, but we're not getting results and yada, yada. Like it's again, like PR, they could pitch you to 15 TV outlets, but if nobody picks you up that month, it's not necessarily the publicist's fault. It just was the timing, So I think if you can speak to the data and make data a regular part of your conversations with the people that you are working with, I think that would solve a lot of those problems, because it's really hard for them to huff and puff if you've got the data right in front of their face.
And that's a great way to pull the emotion out of it as well, because it's just, like you said, it's just right there. So if people don't have a CRM, or maybe they do have a CRM and it's just that getting the team, we're the same as you. We like to pull everything into ClickUp because I don't want anything in the inbox that just gets lost. I like being able to see everything nice and tidy in the task that we have at hand. Yeah. But if, maybe you have one and people aren't really using it or they're not on board, do you have any tools or tips to get buy-in from the organization as a whole to help kind of move people into that? Because that also, I think, helps with everybody understanding what everybody has on their plate, what they're working on, and kind of removes some of that maybe an unintentional animosity that people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. It allows for more transparency, I think.
Yeah. So application adoption is a whole job. Yes. That is not a part-time job.
Yes.
We actually have a dashboard inside ClickUp that allows us to see things like how many unread notifications does each team member have, how many past due tasks. I think that each CRM is going to have its own reporting or its own functionality, but at the end, you do need to kind of set metrics for what are the yellow lights? What are the signs that somebody might be having an off week or maybe isn't using the software? And then you're going to have to start intervening from there. But I think that, when you're first introducing the CRM would be the best time because you've got about 6 weeks when you introduce a program to get your team to adopt it before it really becomes an uphill battle. After that. If you introduced it, they didn't adopt it, and now it's past that initial 6 weeks, it's going to be like exponentially harder for you to try to enforce it and get them to adopt it at that point. But it's really hard to do if you can't tell how they're using it. So you have to figure out what you can track in the CRM that will indicate to you that they're using it correctly or incorrectly, and then intervene as necessary and as often as necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the things that I've done at previous jobs is if somebody sends me an email with the task, my response back is, please put this in our CRM and I will address it at that time. Yeah. And it seems a little bit like, whatever, but I think if you're responsible for making sure that CRM is being used and you're responsible for needing that data in order to run your job, you have to also just be diligent about always requesting people to just put it in that system. And eventually, hopefully they come around and just get used to it.
Yeah.
Change is hard for people.
It is hard. I feel too, like organizations, when they bring in new software, often it's like, here's the new software. And then they give you this very strange, general training on it where they're trying to tell you about everything the software can do. And really the smartest thing to do is to sit down with each type of team member or each department and say, okay, here is how you will use this and all of the examples, right? And just walk them through what they need to know for their job. They don't need to know how ClickUp works all together, but if they can, if they know what their role is and how the workflows are set up, it's a lot easier to get them to adopt because then they'll see the benefits.
No, that's a great point. So, we're at the end of the year. Today is technically Giving Tuesday, as not when we're recording, obviously, but as this is going live. So you might be feeling like, holy cow, I just got through Thanksgiving. We just got this whole campaign running. I'm not doing this again next year. As far, let's plan for the holiday next year. Let's get it done. So when it comes to, we're in this place now, we're motivated. We're like, okay, I'm not going to do this next year. I want to make sure that next year is more organized, better. Do you have any tips for kind of planning for the following year and how you place things and set up your schedule so that you can feel more supported and have kind of the workload that is manageable?
Yeah, I think that we have this tool that we use. It's called the aerial view. And it's just a spreadsheet that shows every single week in the year and the initiatives that we want to hit. And the most important thing about that tool is we have to put into it anything that is happening in our lives, personal or professional, that's going to impact our productivity.
Okay.
And it could be anything from a vacation, a birthday. Usually people underestimate how this stuff impacts them. So if you're taking a trip, that trip does not just impact your ability to get things done on the dates of your trip. The week before, probably 2 weeks before, you're going to be running around doing extra errands and things to get ready. The week you come back, you might be jet lagged. You're going to be slower, so like one trip, it's not going to just impact a week. It's going to impact a whole month. Right. And so you have to think about that when you're starting to plan out your fundraising and when you're sitting down with your clients, you need to be sitting there and saying, okay, we know that as the year goes on, our schedules get heavier. So we don't want to be in a position where we're pitching late or we're trying to fundraise and it's like last minute and everybody's exhausted. So we need to start this project in September, or we need to start this, and I hate to say it, but like in my business, we do everything a month ahead.
Yep.
Like there is no, like if you're operating where you're trying to complete the things that need to be done this week, you're in trouble, because if you run into, productivity monsters, whatever that looks like for you in your business or your life, you're not going to get things done. Then you're going to get behind. Then you're going to be stressed. Then you're not delivering. Most of us get paid based on what we deliver. So I would say that learning how to better understand how the things in your life are impacting your ability to get things done and learning to anticipate it. So everything that happened in December, you need to be writing down somewhere so that when you're planning December next year, you can say, oh, I remember this. We had 8 people go out of the office for Christmas vacation. And then we had, you know what I mean? Like you won't remember a year later. So you need to like document it. I mean, I do it when we take our tree down. I'm like, okay, we need to order more ornament hooks because I'm never going to remember when we go to whip that thing out in November next year. So I would say it's learning to document what's going on and actually understand your true capacity as a business, as a professional. You just have to get better about it. And if you can do that and start factoring that stuff into the way that you plan, you're no longer going to feel behind. And that may mean that you have to reduce your expectation of what you can get done until you can get better systems in place too.
Yeah, I do the same thing. When I plan out my year, especially like the big events, I put out like everything that I've got going on and when I'm going to take vacation and all that good stuff, because it has dictated a change in schedule at times because, just like you said, I didn't put everything together in my head. I was like, oh, I'm taking a vacation in June. But if I have an event July 1st, like that's too tight, right? So I think it's really smart to see it visually. And I think especially if you're part of a team, to see it visually, I think is critical so that you guys can adapt and say, oh, we've got too many people that are planning on a vacation at this time. And if you can get ahead of it, then everybody's on the same page and everybody can make adjustments and you can work on it collaboratively.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all about thinking ahead. And then the other half of that is not allowing yourself to push things off. So people usually like think that they can get 30% more done in a day than they actually can. So like when you're making your to-do list, you're supposed to cut it down by 30%. Mm-hmm. But like, that's the other thing is if you're looking at that aerial view or whatever tool you're using, because you said you do this too, it's no longer an option to push it. Because you've got stuff coming up in 3 weeks and you really will not be able to catch up.
Well, and I think, the last thing that you kind of said was, it allows you to kind of figure out what systems you need to put in place. And I think that's so true too, because when you have this, let this be the challenge, for next year. I know that I have my gala at this time every year. We're always behind to get it done. But now we as a team have taken a look at the aerial view. So let's backdate our tasks and goals and things and kind of create those templates for planning that then we can just repurpose year over year.
Yeah. I mean, the hardest part about that, like with a gala, is just getting people to get you their stuff on time. So you can get all your stuff done and still be in a place where you're waiting for people. So like you also have to put in some sort of boundary for people. Like there will be a consequence if you do not get this to me by X date, right? Like it's unfortunate, but we work with other humans. We don't have control over the entire project. And so we have to also set parameters that, will actually get their attention and make them follow the deadline.
Yeah. So then I'm curious about your thoughts on this, because I agree with you. And I have been in that place several times. And I think, in the nonprofit space, there's kind of that emotion around like, we don't want to be too pushy, because what if they decide they don't want to participate in this, that, and the other? But at the same token, we also teach people how to treat us. And so, I mean, I guess, do you have any opinion or thoughts on like how much is too much to kind of push? And also understanding that you have a job to get done. And, hopefully if these people care enough about your organization, sometimes we internalize that negative reaction that actually isn't there. And they want that push in order to help you out.
Right. I think that, so the first thing is everyone has to be on board. So like, this isn't something that you could just do without the business owners. Okay. But I would explain it to them. I would say, look, every year we plan this gala, we're not getting the information we need. And it becomes this like race where for the last 2 weeks, everyone's working overtime and things get mistakes are made and things get missed because everything's coming in last minute. And so we would like to say that, this is the end date to get your stuff in. If you don't get it in by this date, this will happen. And, and then you need to make sure the owner's on board with whatever that consequence is, whether it's that they're no longer going to be featured in the book or they're, you know what I mean? Like, or maybe you're going to make it 5 times harder for them to submit it. So like, kind of like when I'm thinking about this because my bank was recently acquired and they were doing this thing where they were like, oh, well, you have until November 4th to activate your new cards. And, I'm putting that off like the plague because I know it's going to take me all day to update everything I have on auto pay with the new card. So I'm just avoiding it. And just recently I tried to use one of my old ones and they declined it. And then when I activated the new one, it went right through and I was like, So like they're starting to set boundaries like, well, if you don't do it now, when you go to do it, it's going to be harder. So that's like another way you can do it, but it just depends on like all those factors, like who is the client, what is, the level of people coming to this gala. A lot of times, unfortunately, they might be outsourcing it to like a different team member who just puts it off.
Right.
Like that's the other problem is you may not be getting the actual person that's going to do it on the phone.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. It might be their assistant or it might be somebody on a different department in their company that needs to follow through. I mean, it could be a whole host of things. So that's a great point.
Yeah. So it's knowing your people, right? So like, if you know that Jane has an assistant named Julie and Julie never gets you anything on time, I'd be calling Jane like 2 weeks before it's due. Like, hey, just so you know, we haven't heard from Julie. Like, do you know where she's at with this?
Yeah. Right.
I'm curious. Just be very curious how things are going. And then she'll get on Julie. So yeah, it's kind of learning to manage your humans.
Yes. Managing your humans is very difficult. Kind of the last thing that I wanted to ask you is if what kind of thoughts or tips you have for people or action that they could take if they're getting to that point where they're like, okay, I'm about done here. Like I can't handle this anymore. I'm frustrated. And there are cases where like, it just is what it is and you need to step away and move on. But if you are somewhere where you really want to keep going, do you have any thoughts on, ways to kind of have those conversations or action you can take yourself to kind of make adjustments?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that if you are in that place, you probably have not figured out the process to either qualify leads or qualify making that sale or getting the funding, however you want to phrase it. You probably haven't nailed it yet. You probably haven't figured it out because if you had, you wouldn't be so frustrated. And I think that, sadly, sometimes if it gets that bad, you have to stop and regroup. And I know that is the last thing that anybody wants to hear, but we recently had to do this with our business because we hired a bunch of team members and we started to see the indicators that our systems were no longer functioning in certain areas of the business. And so we identified this and we decided to do a week in service where we close the business for a week and we're just getting everything in order. We're updating the processes that are no longer working. We're fixing everything that isn't working the way we need it to be. And you would need to do the same thing. You would need to literally just stop the day-to-day for like a week and figure out what is the game plan to move forward. If we're going to move forward, how are we going to do it? What is a better strategy? What are the processes that aren't working when we're trying to get these funds? Like it really doesn't feel good to close for a week, but it will feel amazing when you reopen and you've really like got a better roadmap.
Well, and I think, what you're saying too is you're making a choice and you're coming up with solutions. You're not just saying, well, this isn't working, throwing your hands up in the air and being like, I'm just frustrated. Somebody needs to fix this for me. You're taking a proactive role in making a change and coming up with solutions.
Right. We have to walk before we can run.
Yeah.
So if we're running and suddenly everybody's tripping all over each other, we got to stop for a minute, right? Like think about it that way. It's like a relay, like, especially if you have a team, there's so many humans involved. And if all of a sudden half the team is suffering or they're not getting their work done to the standard you need or whatever, I mean, you have to take a step back to fix it. Otherwise, you're just going to be building a house of cards. It's like if you just keep pushing harder and faster, it's just going to get worse and worse.
Yeah.
So...
Well, I think we've given you guys a lot of things to think about. I've loved a lot of the tips and the analogies that you've come up with and shared, because I feel like it really helps put a visual to sometimes something that feels hyper emotional, that feels hard to step out of and become practical. So is there anything else you'd like to mention when it comes to just kind of creating systems and setting boundaries and growing within your team?
I would say the most important thing that people need to know is you're never done. Yeah. Fixing your systems, maintaining your systems, improving your systems. I think a lot of people see it as like a one and done thing, and it's really not. Someone needs to be making sure that things are working and be looking for those guideposts that give you that first sign that we might be off track. Right. And I think that if you can identify one person in each organization that you work with, or maybe it's yourself, and you just sit down every Friday's a great planning day because people are usually tired. Yeah. You're not going to be pitching anybody on a Friday. So sit down and actually, go through everything and identify all those like holes that you found throughout the week and how are you going to fix them? Because if you're letting things go, like every time the business grows, every time you gain a big contract, you're basically stress testing your systems. And so you have to be able to identify as quickly as possible when you're hitting that max and you need to fix something. And so I would say that if I had any advice at all, assess your systems often. Early and often.
I agree. That doesn't mean change your systems all the time. It just means make sure that things are on the tracks.
Exactly. And honestly, like I would rather stop now for a week or a day than collapse 2 months from now. Like
100%.
I
agree.
It's just better.
Yeah. Well, Katie, this has been amazing. If people want to learn more about you and your company, how do they do that?
Sure. You can just visit us on Instagram. It's Katie Matusky is my handle. It's my name. And we're super friendly. You can hang out with us in the DMs and check out all our free resources.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll make sure to link that up in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
I mean, how incredible was that? Thank you again to Katie for joining me. I hope that you got some great tools. Really, it's about building your systems and your processes. And I know that's something we talk about a lot and it's not as sexy and fun. But I think that she gives some great insight and tools and ways to really think about it in a different way. And remember, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Take a look at the existing systems you have and figure out what you can utilize. What aren't you utilizing fully when it comes to those tools that you already have access to? For now, I want to say happy Giving Tuesday. I know it will be, but I hope it's super successful for you and your organization. And I can't wait to see you in the next one.